In 1943, three Waffen-SS officers, the elite force responsible for the massacre of millions of people, in their legendary black uniforms, in front of three civilians kneeling, their heads bowed to the ground. This black and white photo was originally locked in an iron chest belonging to former Nazi official Karl Rauser for 75 years, seemingly just another piece of evidence of Nazi brutality. But when Leon Mertens, a trainee with a keen eye, enlarged the photo and discovered inexplicable details, they discovered that these were not regular SS soldiers, but local soldiers who had been ordered to pretend to be them. If this photo were deciphered incorrectly, it could be used by the far right to propagate that the SS only disciplined bad guys. At the same time, those who knelt would forever be considered Jewish criminals, even though they were pure Germans punished for daring to disobey orders. Why would the SS stage and record a public disciplinary scene in a seemingly peaceful residential area? Who ordered the staging of this incident? From the photo, Leon Mertens inadvertently discovered more truths about one of the most brutal regimes in human history. It all began with a sealed iron chest found in a dusty basement. After the death of Karl Rauser, a former officer from the Nazi era, German authorities were called in to inspect his belongings. Tucked away under a wooden workbench, they found an old metal chest that had been locked for decades. It was heavy and reinforced, with thick hinges and no labels. The team expected military tools or forgotten war relics. Inside the chest were hundreds of original documents and photographs from the time of the Third Reich. Some had official stamps from the SS, Hitler's elite paramilitary force. The collection included deportation lists, coded transmissions, and images from wartime operations. But there was one photo that stood out among all the rest. It was quiet, still, and terrifying. In the photo, three SS officers stood in full uniform. In front of them, three civilians were kneeling on the ground with their heads bowed. The soldiers stared forward with cold expressions, their posture controlled and deliberate. The setting behind them was not a prison, a battlefield, or a concentration camp. There was a wooden fence, a small garden, and a house with flower boxes beneath the windows. Something about the scene felt wrong. This did not look like a location meant for punishment. It looked like a quiet neighborhood. The image was logged by the archive team as evidence of civilian intimidation, just one of many. It was filed away and marked for future review. But to Leon Mertens, a young graduate intern working at the German National Archive, the photo felt too unusual to ignore. There were no title or seniority, but she noticed details others did not. The uniforms in the photo looked too clean. The composition felt too staged. It looked more like a performance than a documentation. Leon asked a simple question. Why would SS officers stage a moment of discipline in such a peaceful-looking place? Leon continued to work during off hours. Every photos were scanned at the highest optical resolution available, adjusted light levels, sharpened shadows, and looked closely at the background. That was when the first hidden clue appeared. On the wooden gate behind one of the civilians, there was a chipped metal number. Above the heads of the officers, behind a small tree, a sign became visible. It read, Bäckerei Grunwald, which translates to Grunwald Bakery. Leona began searching property records from the 1940s. She cross-referenced bakery names, street layouts, and house numbers. After hours of searching, she found a match in a small town called Eichenheim. The town had no famous battles, no listed concentration camps, and no presence in Holocaust textbooks. Records showed that Eichenheim had a unique population mix. The residents of that neighborhood were not Jewish by religious practice, and they were not classified as Aryan either. They belonged to a group called Mischlinge. This term referred to people with mixed Jewish ancestry. Some had one Jewish grandparent. Others had two. According to Nazi law, they were not considered full Jews, but they were also not fully accepted as Germans. Leon realized this photo might not show a random act of punishment. It might capture something much more specific. The three civilians kneeling may have been Mischlinge. The SS officers might have been there not to deport or arrest, but to humiliate. And this moment had never been recorded in any official report. There were no survivor testimonies from Eichenheim, no military records of actions taken there. It was as if the event had been erased or never meant to be known in the first place. This discovery shook Lyon. The photo suggested that Nazi violence did not always follow the clear lines drawn by history books. It could reach into quiet towns. It could target people who lived just outside the definition of danger. People who thought they were safe. It was only the beginning. Lyon still needed to know exactly who those civilians were and why this event was kept secret for so long. What else could this photo be hiding? In the next chapter, we follow Lyon to investigate further and use digital tools to uncover the truth behind one blurry sign, one street, and one forgotten block in a town lost to history. Every photo tells a story, but some stories are buried beneath the surface. This picture, at first glance, seemed straightforward. The crisp uniforms, the silent fear on the civilians' faces, and the strangely peaceful background all pointed to something deliberate. It looked like a staged moment, designed to send a message. What that message was, and who it was meant for, remained unclear. One detail stood out. In the background, just above the kneeling figures, a faded sign read, Bäckerei Grünwald. It was the name of a bakery. That clue gave researchers something to follow. They began scanning thousands of digital records from the early 1940s, narrowing their focus to towns where SS officers had been active and where a bakery by that name had existed. Eventually, they found a match in a place called Eichenheim. It was not a town that appeared in textbooks. It had no major events, no listed deportations, no historical monuments. It was small, quiet, and largely forgotten. That silence, however, made it even more intriguing. It was exactly the kind of place where the regime could carry out actions away from public attention. By reviewing property records and comparing structural details in the photo, the team located the exact house where the image had been taken. The position of the windows, the design of the gate, and the layout of the street all matched perfectly. Records confirmed that the photo was taken in 1943, based on who was living at that address and the military presence in the area. Then came the turning point. The residents of the house were not classified as Jewish in Nazi paperwork. They were not considered Aryan either. Instead, they were labeled as Mischlinge. Mischlinge were people of mixed ancestry. Some had one Jewish grandparent. Others had two. They lived in a legal gray zone, allowed to remain in society but stripped of many rights. These individuals spoke German, followed German customs, and had family members who fought in past wars. Still, their bloodline made them a threat in the eyes of the Reich. The photo no longer appeared to capture a random moment of discipline. It was evidence of a targeted humiliation. These civilians were not outsiders. They were neighbors. But their background had marked them as impure. The Nazi system saw them as a problem to be managed, even if quietly. To understand the people in the image, genealogists began tracing their histories. They analyzed birth records, church documents, insurance files, and property deeds. Slowly, the women in the photo began to take shape, not as symbols, but as real individuals. Many were born to German mothers and grandmothers. Some had Jewish fathers or grandfathers. Under Nazi racial law, this placed them in one of two categories: Mischlinge, of the first or second degree. The law did not care how far back the ancestry went. Once labeled, it followed them everywhere. With each piece of evidence, the truth became harder to ignore. This moment wasn't chaos. It wasn't war. It was something quieter and more dangerous. A calculated display of power, performed in public, without documentation. It was designed to remind a community that even those who seemed safe could be shamed, controlled, and erased. What stood out most wasn't just the cruelty. It was the total lack of response afterward. There were no survivor testimonies, no press, no mention in SS reports, no trace in post-war investigations. The act had been silenced almost as soon as it happened. The image now revealed something chilling. The Nazis did not always rely on large-scale operations. Sometimes they used small gestures to create fear. A camera, a few uniforms, a quiet street. That was enough to make people disappear without a sound. This wasn't history written in books. This was history hidden in plain sight. But if the SS officers in the photo acted without official orders, then who were they? And why did their actions vanish from the record? The next chapter uncovers the identity of the men behind the uniforms and reveals the consequences that no one expected. Finding out who the victims were was only half the mystery. The next question was just as important. Who were the men in uniform? Leon and Marta had spent weeks digging into the lives of the women kneeling in the photo. But now, with the help of the archive's new facial recognition software, Leon turned her attention to the SS officers standing behind them. The software had been trained on tens of thousands of images from the Third Reich. It compared bone structures, eye spacing, and facial features across decades-old documents. Within minutes, 2 matches came back. The first was Hans Keitel. According to official SS files, he was a mid-level officer stationed near southern Germany in 1943. He had been disciplined by the SS Internal Tribunal for conduct unbecoming and unauthorized enforcement actions. The date of his punishment matched exactly 1 week after the photo was taken. The second man was Otto Reimann. He also appeared in SS records as a logistics officer with no formal authority to carry out punishments. Yet he, too, had been cited for behavior outside his official role. His file noted an internal investigation followed by a sudden transfer to an unlisted post. That post, according to the record, had no return address. The third man in the photo remained unidentified. The software offered a partial match with a young junior officer who vanished in 1943. No further information existed. His trail simply ended. Leon knew the picture was more than just a photo now. It was evidence of SS members acting without orders, targeting civilians who were not on any deportation list. These were not crimes committed in the fog of war. They were choices made in broad daylight, on a street lined with picket fences and garden flowers. Some groups would accuse the archive of trying to rewrite history. Others would use the information to push dangerous revisionist ideas. Behind closed doors, the team debated how to handle the discovery. Dr. Stahl, one of the senior historians, warned that misclassifying the photo could damage the archive's credibility. If they said these women were German, not Jewish, it would force the public to confront a different kind of Nazi cruelty. It would mean the regime had turned against its people. Leon argued that the truth had already been uncovered. The punishment in the photo had not been part of an official raid or a planned relocation. It was not in the records because it was never supposed to be. That made it even more important to show the world. For weeks, the team continued working in silence, reviewing more documents and cross-checking timelines. Marta expanded her genealogical audit and found that nearly 70% of the women at the Eichenheim address traced their maternal ancestry back several generations in Germany. Their families had fought in earlier wars. Their names were engraved on local memorials. By all social standards, they were German. But under Nazi law, they were not enough. That was the horror captured in the photo. It was not just an act of violence. It was a statement. It showed that even loyalty, service, and bloodline could not protect you from a system obsessed with perfection. The SS did not need official permission to humiliate. All they needed was fear, and a reason to remind others that no one was safe. Dr. Holtz finally made his position clear. The archive would not suppress the image. Instead, they would release it with a full report. The report would explain the identities of the officers, the background of the civilians, and the legal status of Mischlinge under Nazi law. The archive would not suggest a new narrative. It would simply provide the facts and let the public decide what they meant. But before they could make the findings public, one last piece of evidence arrived that changed everything. What hidden message did the SS leave behind in an internal report that had been buried for decades? In the next chapter, we uncover a classified memorandum that reveals the true motive behind the raid and why it was never meant to be seen. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones written down quietly, never shared, and almost forgotten. Just when the archive team thought they had uncovered all there was to know about the photo, a final piece of evidence emerged. It came from a folder buried deep within the Rouser collection, hidden between stacks of handwritten letters and torn military forms. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary SS report. But as Leone read the faded type, she realized it held something far more disturbing. The document had no signature, no official stamp, and no known author. It was a short internal memorandum marked "Confidential for commanding eyes only." The language was vague, but one phrase stood out. It referred to a moral panic spreading in what it called sensitive residential provinces. It warned that unchecked rumors and boundary testing were eroding loyalty among citizens who had been granted special exemptions. Then came the chilling line. The memo stated that certain elements among our own needed to be quietly reminded of the consequences of drifting from ideal national character. It mentioned no names, no dates, and no towns. But it did mention Ekenheim. For Leone and Dr. Holtz, the meaning was clear. This wasn't a punishment ordered by a central office. It was an unofficial action meant to send a message. The SS officers had not been carrying out a legal mission. They were performing a show of force designed to reassert control over citizens who lived in the gray space of Nazi law. These were not Jews trying to flee. They were Germans of mixed heritage who had managed to survive, unnoticed, under the weight of a system that demanded purity. The photo was never meant for newspapers or propaganda. It was a signal sent to those who had doubts about their place in the Reich. It reminded them that even quiet compliance was not enough. Dr. Stahl, who had long warned against rushing to conclusions, sat in silence after reading the memo. He admitted it was the first time in his career that he felt physically shaken by a single document. The text was not violent in tone, but its coldness was what made it terrifying. It spoke of lives and bloodlines as if they were administrative errors. It treated punishment like a form of calibration, fixing something that had slipped out of line. Marta, who had spent weeks tracing the family trees of the Ekenheim residents, found that many had lived without incident for years. They had not been involved in political groups. They had not broken the laws. Most were middle-class women raising families. Their only mistake was having the wrong grandparent. Leone and the team agreed that the photo, combined with the memo, told a new story. It was not about war or resistance. It was about fear. It showed how totalitarian systems can use quiet terror to control even those who are not enemies. It proved that even silence was not safe. The decision to publish the photo was now final. But how to explain it without misunderstanding became the next challenge. They knew this was a fragile moment. Survivor groups needed to be informed. Historians needed context. The story had to be told with clarity and care, or it risked becoming fuel for those who twist history to fit dangerous ideas. As they prepared the report for release, the archive team understood they were stepping into difficult territory. The findings would force people to ask uncomfortable questions. They would reveal that some victims of the Nazi regime were never recorded, never honored, and never even counted. They were erased in real time, punished for existing in the margins. The photo was no longer just an image. It was proof of a crime committed in silence. But what happened to the women in that photo? Did they survive, or did history succeed in burying their names forever? In the final chapter, we follow the last search for their identities and uncover the haunting truth about how close this forgotten violence came to being lost for good. After weeks of analyzing the image, tracing documents, and studying classified memos, only one question remained. Who were the women? Leone had already learned that they were not random civilians. They had lived at the exact address in Ekenheim shown in the photo. Most were labeled Mischlinge, with family lines that stretched deep into German soil. They were part of the town's history, yet their names had never appeared in any survivor records or post-war testimonies. Marta returned to the property lists from 1943. Cross-referencing census data, there were 11 women identified to live at that location during the time the photo was likely taken. Using birth and marriage records, she narrowed it to 6 possible individuals who matched the age and appearance of those seen kneeling in the image. But what was found next made her pause. 2 of the women had death certificates dated early 1944. Cause of death? Unknown. No burial records, no funeral notes, and no statements from family members. The documents were typed, official, and cold. There were no personal details, no mentions of how or why they died. Another 3 names simply disappeared from all German records after 1945. No marriage licenses, no emigration forms, and no property claims. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. Marta suspected they may have fled during the final days of the war or changed their identities to avoid further persecution. The last name on the list belonged to a woman named Elise Köhler. Unlike the others, Elise had a post-war marriage certificate filed in Switzerland in 1946. Her husband was a German soldier who had deserted the army late in the war. They had relocated to Zurich and lived there until the 1970s. No children, no public interviews, no memoirs. Just a quiet life far from where the photo had been taken. Leon tried to find photographs of Elise, hoping to match her face to the figure in the center of the image. The only available photo was from 1961, faded and unclear. It was impossible to say for certain, but something in her posture and expression felt familiar. The way she stood, the look in her eyes, it could have been her. In the end, the archive could only confirm one identity with some level of confidence. The others remained as shadows, lives recorded in numbers and ink, but never fully restored. The discovery was painful, not just because of what was found, but because of what was missing. These women had suffered, had been humiliated, and then quietly erased. No graves, no stories, no justice. Only a photograph remained, capturing a moment they likely never imagined would survive them. But what does this forgotten act of cruelty mean for how we understand history today? History often remembers what is loud, public, and undeniable. But sometimes the most haunting truths are the ones no one talks about. The photograph from Eichenheim, once buried deep in a locked chest, had become more than a simple image. It had grown into a symbol of quiet terror. It was not taken in a camp or during a battle. It was captured on a quiet street, in front of a normal house during an ordinary day. And that was exactly what made it so terrifying. The violence in the photo did not scream. It whispered. It used silence as a weapon. These women were not dragged from their homes by the thousands. They were not placed on trains. But they were punished all the same. Not because they had committed crimes, but because of their bloodline. Because their family trees had the wrong names in the wrong places. What happened to them was not recorded in most history books. There were no speeches, no trials, no memorials. Their pain was personal. And because it happened out of sight, it remained out of memory. Until now. This kind of erasure is dangerous. It creates space for denial. It makes it easier to believe that cruelty only happens in large numbers, under banners and slogans. But the truth is that regimes like the Nazis used many tools. Some were loud and brutal. Others were quiet, precise, and just as effective. For Leon and the team at the archive, this realization changed everything. Their job had never been just about documents. It was about truth. Real truth includes the parts that feel inconvenient, the parts that do not fit into easy categories of victim or villain. Real truth includes those who were punished in silence. When the archive released the report to the public, the reaction was divided. Some said the photo was too small to matter. Others feared it would confuse the story of the Holocaust. But many people, especially families with mixed ancestry, saw it differently. For them, the photo confirmed something they had always suspected: that there were victims who had names and faces, but no history to hold them. The photograph now rests in a museum archive, but its power has not faded. It tells a story about identity, fear, and control. It forces us to think about how systems of power reach into everyday life. And it asks us to look again at what we think we know. Because if one image, hidden for 75 years, can open this many questions, how many more are still waiting to be found? In the final section, we explore why uncovering forgotten truths like this matters more than ever, and how remembering the erased can change how we see the past. The photograph from Eichenheim revealed a disturbing reality about Nazi oppression. It showed violence could happen anywhere, even in peaceful neighborhoods, targeting those who thought they were safe. The discovery proved history's hidden chapters still wait to be uncovered. As technology advances, more lost stories may surface. This raises important questions about how we document and remember the past. What other truths remain buried in old files and faded photographs? Each discovery challenges our understanding of history. This story teaches us the power of persistence. Even when evidence seems lost, truth can still emerge. By remembering these forgotten victims, we honor their lives and strengthen our commitment to justice. Their story reminds us that every life matters, and no one should disappear from history. The work of uncovering the past continues, helping us build a more honest future.